I'm going to tell you why I believe that Spencer Rattler will be the Saints QB2 this season. We got all that and a little bit of lanyap for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're looking ahead now, right? The New Orleans Saints have a preseason game on the way. What could the New Orleans Saints learn? How many starters do we expect to see? And what could this tell us about the ever interesting QB2 battle? We're going to dive into all that. We'll get into which starters we might see later on. We'll dive into why the preseason depth chart is pretty interesting, but we're going to lead everything off today and kick everything off with Spencer Rattler in terms of why I believe he will be the Saints QB2 in 2024. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us your first listen and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more all summer long. As you look through, you'll be able to find everything that you're looking for, a bunch of players, player props, spreads, all that stuff. And FanDuel right now is giving you a free boost or bonus. They're giving it to all customers all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com today to get your summer started. If you ask me, right, my early opinion, Spencer Rattler will be the New Orleans Saints backup quarterback by the time that the regular season rolls around. Now, let me be very, very clear about why I believe that, because it actually doesn't have anything to do with any feelings at all around Jake Haener. I don't think that this is about Jake Haener at all. I think Jake Haener has the opportunity to win that QB2 role, but I think that this quarterback battle is going to be settled by the fact that this coaching staff drafted one of these quarterbacks and did not draft the other. Spencer Rattler was drafted by Clint Kubiak's offensive coaching staff, by the new offensive coaching staff that Dennis Allen appointed for this New Orleans Saints team to try to revitalize what's going on that side of the ball here in 2024. Because of that, when they turned around and they drafted Spencer Rattler, it became logical that Spencer Rattler was this coaching staff's quarterback. And that's why I believe that he will eventually win the backup quarterback role for the New Orleans Saints behind Derek Carr. Now, here's what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to go so far as to say some of the things that some other folks are trying to put out there around the idea that Spencer Rattler could potentially start in 2024, or that there is a competition between Spencer Rattler or Derek Carr. That is simply untrue and unfounded. That is people trying to engage you for engagement. Don't buy into that. This is not a competition at all between Derek Carr and Spencer Rattler. This is a competition between Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener. And head coach Dennis Allen made it apparent today, or in yesterday's practice, that the team has not fully committed to both of these guys, or either one of these guys, ending up actually becoming the backup. He made it sound like they're still trying to figure out if they have a backup quarterback in this building, meaning that they could potentially still go to the free agency market. They could still reunite with Nathan Peterman at a later time if they wanted to. There's a lot of different ways that this team could go in order to make sure that it has the QB2 that it wants. But obviously, they would love for that QB2 and potential future of the New Orleans Saints to be one of the guys that they themselves have already invested in. But for me, with Spencer Rattler being the most recent investment and the investment by this coaching staff, I think that ends up going a long way for his case to be the backup quarterback behind Derek Carr in 2024. Here's the other thing. One of the things that Spencer Rattler said at the podium struck me as something that is very true. You have to be able to move in today's NFL. And out of the two, Spencer Rattler moves better than Jake Haener. Spencer Rattler has had better practices than Jake Haener, although I would argue that Jake Haener has been more consistent. So which one do you lean on? Do you lean on making sure that you have the consistency, or do you lean on the ceiling, right? And the top performance that you could get from that quarterback. It's very tough. But when it comes to Spencer Rattler, the bottom level of that performance has not been much worse than what Jake Haener has produced consistently. I don't think that there's much of a drop off there in terms of those things. So I would say that they've both been majority consistent. They both have varying styles, although both of them do pack a bit of athleticism and allow you to be able to move with the ball in a quarterback's hand. But I do think that Spencer Rattler gives you a little bit more of a floor, a little bit higher of a floor because of his ability to run, because of his ability and because of his mobility, and because of all of those pieces. So I think that between that, the way that this New Orleans Saints offense is constructed, which fits exactly what it was that Spencer Rattler was doing at South Carolina, which I'm sure was a part of that very draft process that I was discussing when I talked about Spencer Rattler being this coaching staff's draft pick. They watched his South Carolina tape. They met with him. They took their time to discuss with him and put in front of him, hey, here's the offensive system that we're wanting to run. What do you think about it? How would you handle this? Those types of interview questions that are typically given to quarterbacks in the draft process. And I'm sure that he knocked all those out of the park, because what the Saints are doing right now verbally is very similar, according to Spencer Rattler, to what they were doing in South Carolina. So that also gives him a little bit of a leg up as well. Although I have not seen any semblance of Jake Haener being left behind in this new offensive system at all. I want to be fair about that. So those are the reasons why I think Spencer Rattler will end up being the Saints QB2 behind Derek Carr. Do I think that he'll be the future at the position? I don't know, because I don't think that the Saints have yet seen all of the quarterbacks that will eventually be a part of the future quarterback conversation. I.e., I wouldn't be surprised if they go back to the quarterback pool in next year's draft, or look to free agency should somebody hit free agency post their Derek Carr days, all of those things. I think that the future quarterback for this team could potentially be on the roster, but I don't think that everyone that's going to be involved in that conversation is currently on the roster. I think that that will happen at a later date. And again, I want to be clear, because a lot of people look at this as Spencer Rattler versus Jake Haener. You're either dumb because you like Spencer Rattler, or you're dumb because you like Jake Haener. And that's really not the way that we should be having this conversation at all. It's who does the coaching staff like? Not who do we like? It's who goes out there and shows the best performance, not who do we think will go out there and show the best performance. It's about what actually happens out on that field and how the actual coaching staff responds to that. So that's the thing that I'll be watching for over the course of the preseason, which is where I think a lot of this stuff is going to be kind of solidified. I expect that Jake Haener, as the one that owns the seniority going into his second year as opposed to his rookie year as a New Orleans Saints quarterback, will very likely start the first game up against the Arizona Cardinals, unless the procedure that he's currently undergoing for that treatment for his skin cancer diagnosis ends up causing him to miss more time later on this week. If that ends up being the case, then it would make sense to start Spencer Rattler in that case, because he will have gotten a greater portion of the game plan. That's just logical. We've seen that before with other players that were sick and things like that, to where they'll start somebody over them because they were sick and didn't get the opportunity to practice. So if Jake Haener has to miss time this week, then that would end, or more time this week, then that could put things in Spencer Rattler's direction. But I expect that seniority-wise, Jake Haener will get the start against the Arizona Cardinals, and then Spencer Rattler will play the second half. And then I would expect that to reverse to where Spencer Rattler would get the start against the San Francisco 49ers, and then Jake Haener would take the second half, and then we might see some starters in the third game. That's kind of what I'm expecting, but certainly we'll see which way this all goes. All right, coming up next, I want to dive into why the New Orleans Saints preseason depth chart is going to be interesting once it finally does end up becoming available. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, where you can make every moment more. It is America's #1 sportsbook, and they're making sure that the sports keep sporting all summer long. Some spots, you're not going to be able to find a lot of action once the NHL and NBA postseasons fill up or finish up, but with the MLB, the Olympics, boxing, and so much more still going on, there is a ton for you to check out over at FanDuel. And you can even get ahead on the NFL season if you'd like. The New Orleans Saints, 4.5-point favorites to open the season up against the Carolina Panthers. You think that they will beat that spread or lose to that spread? You can get all that and more over at FanDuel.com today. And FanDuel right now is making summer even more fun because they are giving away to all customers a free boost or bonus daily. That means that there's something for everyone every day all summer long. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get your summer started off right. That's FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, family, a little bit of a kind of mid-show kind of topic change here or programming change here as we got the New Orleans Saints official or rather unofficial depth chart ahead of the New Orleans Saints Arizona Cardinals game this weekend. So I just wanted to dive in and give you some of my thoughts on all this, what is surprising, what isn't surprising, all of that. So let's dive into it here as we continue on with today's episode. We appreciate you very much making this your first listen of the day every day. And of course, don't forget to go and check out that Locked On NFL 24/7 stream program to bring you all the biggest stories from around the National Football League, brought to you by the inside folks that know the teams the best. Make sure you go and check it out over on the Locked On NFL YouTube page, proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the New Orleans Saints put out their unofficial depth chart. If you want to take a look at it, you can find it over on my social media account and all that. And of course, if you are an insider, you've already gotten my notes on this, but I just wanted to kind of go through a couple of the different things that we are seeing and maybe some of the things that might be a little bit surprising. The thing that I do want to highlight here is that when it comes to the unofficial depth chart, it is exactly what it sounds like. It is unofficial. It doesn't really give you a full glimpse of who's ahead of whom and all these other things. Sometimes there's some indications of that. In other cases, it's based on seniority and things like that. So let's go to the number one position that I'm sure everybody's wondering about, and that is quarterback. Derek Carr listed with the first team. And then, of course, it's Jake Haener and then Spencer Rattler. This is a seniority situation, of course. I still expect that Jake Haener will get the first team reps or the early, let me not say first team reps, but we'll get the start up against Arizona as he is the senior of the two as a second year quarterback as opposed to the rookie quarterback. So you pay respect to that. You end up getting him there. So that explains to me why he is listed ahead of Spencer Rattler. That was always going to be the expectation. One thing that is pretty surprising, just simply for the New Orleans Saints, is that they immediately have a rookie in the starting lineup in their unofficial depth chart. Sometimes they kind of shy away from this, but look, there's no mystery that Taliese Fuaga right now is set to be the team's starting left tackle. And if you can hit on that as a first round pick, that is a huge win for the New Orleans Saints. Tally has looked really good all throughout training camp. His hand usage, his power, his ability to anchor, his mobility, his athleticism, all of it has been on full display here throughout training camp. Yes, he's had some down reps and things like that. You're always going to have those as a rookie. No surprises there, but certainly a really good opportunity here for Taliese to kind of confirm what it is that the Saints clearly feel about him, which is that he is their starting left tackle. Along the offensive line, they also have Trevor Penning starting at right tackle. No surprise there. The backup, Ali Udoh, little bit of a surprise for some folks there. Ali Udoh was my sneaky starter at right tackle going into this offseason. We'll see how things continue to go, but Trevor Penning right now still listed as the starting right tackle for the moment. At offensive line on the interior is the other big question when it comes to left guard. Nick Saldiveri was looking like it was his job to lose when it came to left guard. Did he lose it? Or is it just based on the injury that he's dealing with? Because Lucas Patrick right now listed ahead of Nick Saldiveri at left guard. Here's the thing we have to remember about this. It's just like I mentioned. It's an unofficial depth chart. Doesn't fully give you a full comprehensive understanding or holistic understanding of the what and why. It just kind of gives you a first look at the what for this first preseason game. But when it comes down to the Nick Saldiveri, Lucas Patrick conversation, you have to consider Lucas Patrick in the lead to be the starter at left guard. I think this one is actually indicative of something. Nick Saldiveri was effectively referenced by name by Dennis Allen not too long ago as one of those young guys that's missing time with injury, that's falling behind. And again, much like with Kendre Miller, Dennis Allen not only saying that he's fighting for positioning or that he's fighting for a spot or whatever, but mentioned that he's trying to make the team. So again, called into question a player's ability to make the team while consistently dealing with injury. And unfortunately, that has been Nick Saldiveri's theme so far since he was drafted last year. So right now, Lucas Patrick, the veteran who's healthy, that brings a lot of energy, that brings a lot of leadership, that brings a lot of experience, a ton of starting experience. That is not a guy, if you're effectively going into your rookie season, right, or at best your second season, that you want to be losing time to, because it's not going to be hard for him to establish a stronghold on that position. Lucas Patrick, in my opinion, has done that successfully throughout training camp. So this is a situation to where him being listed ahead of Nick Saldiveri could potentially mean something. One spot that I thought was really interesting that could be a seniority play here is tight end. Juwan Johnson, of course, is highlighted in red on the unofficial depth chart because he is on an injury list. So he does not get the first team designation in this situation, but Foster Morrow does. after him at second team felt like it would be Dallin Holker based upon what we've seen, the distribution of snaps, Dallin Holker consistently being a part of first team reps since back at OTAs and all these other things. But it's actually Michael Jacobson that's listed ahead of Dallin Holker. To me, this is a seniority situation here. Michael Jacobson's going into his second year with the team. Dallin Holker is an undrafted rookie. Michael Jacobson gets listed ahead of Dallin Holker. I think Dallin Holker is probably going to get a lot of looks over the course of this preseason game, a real opportunity to further establish himself as a guy that looks to be on course to make the roster, in my humble opinion. Him, Foster Moreau, Juwan Johnson, Taysom Hill at the tight end spot, you're pretty golden going into 2024, assuming that Juwan Johnson is healthy. This one's really interesting too. No surprise, but we were talking the other day about the or possibility when it comes to defensive end. We knew that Cam Jordan was going to be listed all by himself. No shot that they were ever going to tag an or on Cam Jordan. But we do get the or for Carl Granderson or Chase Young lining up opposite Cam Jordan. Does it mean anything? No, not really. There are going to be games where Cam Jordan is on the field for the first defensive snap. There are going to be days where he's not. There are going to be games where it's Carl Granderson and Chase Young. There's going to be games where it's Carl Granderson and Cam Jordan. There's going to be games where it's Cam Jordan and Chase Young. It's all going to shift based upon what they feel like is going to be the best pairing for that specific game, that specific game plan. Where's the weaknesses of an offensive line that you're going up against? Do they have an interior player that is struggling that you can send a guy like Cam to crash down on from the edge? Are they weak at the tackle spot, so you want to take advantage early with Carl Granderson and Chase Young? There's a lot of thought process that's going to go into what is going to be a vastly different situation every game when it comes to defensive end. And the other thing that's really interesting too when it comes to defensive end is whoever gets the most starts in the season won't necessarily always be the player that gets the highest percentage of snaps in the season. How many run snaps are there? Are you playing from behind? Are you playing ahead? All of that is going to factor into this defensive end position. I wouldn't read too much into anything you see or hear when it comes to a rotation or who's going to start, because the fact of the matter is that all three of them are starters, and really everybody on the defensive line is always considered a starter. That's been the mentality since back in the Ryan Nielsen days, that everybody that's on the defensive line is a starter, because at some point they're probably going to get the first snap of a game, making them the quote unquote starter for that particular matchup. Last one that I thought was really interesting, Jordan Howden right now getting the nod above Jonathan Abram. Now, this one goes against the seniority situation, which means it means something, right? This is one to where you could easily put Jonathan Abram as the number one safety next to Tyrann Mathieu with Jordan Howden behind him and call it seniority. But there's a concerted decision here to start Jordan Howden or have Jordan Howden listed over Jonathan Abram. We'll see what happens when they get into this game against the Arizona Cardinals in terms of who actually gets the playing time. But I imagine Jordan Howden will get a good amount of playing time behind he and Tyrann Mathieu are Jonathan Abram as well as Will Harris. Will Harris being a guy that I've been really impressed with here throughout all throughout camp, that has consistently found downhill holes to attack in the run game, has covered, has contributed on special teams, all of that. So not super surprising to see the group of those four safeties being the top four safeties, but it is a little surprising right now to see Jordan Howden next to Tyrann Mathieu, with all of the talk over the offseason being that the combination of Tyrann Mathieu and Jonathan Abram has these coaches excited. So coming up next, we're going to dive into how many of these starters should you actually expect to see. I think you'll see more on offense than defense. I'll tell you why as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp Therapy Online has been awesome to me. I know it'll be awesome to you too. One of the things that has been great for me with it has been just sort of being able to establish what my non-negotiables are, particularly my mental health non-negotiables. Like I love to cook and all these other things that are kind of like my comfort spaces and things like that. But I found that therapy is becoming a little bit of a non-negotiable for me. And especially with being on the road so much, something like BetterHelp is super convenient because it's kind of tailor-made to be flexible and suited to your schedule. You can log on and do video chats. You can do phone calls. You can even just kind of do like messaging back and forth and things like that. It's not a situation where you have to go into an office and deal with traffic and all this other stuff. So it makes it an easy non-negotiable that is easy for me to always maintain as well. So never miss another day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off of your first month. That's 10% off your first month over at BetterHelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. I don't think you're going to see too many starters for the first game of the preseason, but I do think in particular on the offensive line, you're going to see at least a few. We appreciate you very much, as always, making us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to also go and check out what's going on all around the rest of Locked On Louisiana with our friends over at Locked On LSU, Matt Moscona and Jake Madison over at Locked On Pelicans. Keep you up to date on those LSU Tigers and New Orleans Pelicans every step of the way and every single day. Make sure you go and check them out as well here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, we'll be back with you for another episode tomorrow. Have a fresh episode for you tomorrow morning, getting ready and looking more specifically at kind of the practices. We're doing kind of like a more general overlook of like where things stand for the Saints going into their game against the Arizona Cardinals. Tomorrow, we'll take a deeper dive into what we're expecting to see from the two padded practices ahead of that game. So I answered one of, Nick's question around who will be the backup quarterback to give my thoughts on that early on in the show. Now I want to go to Jerry's question here about will starters play up against the Arizona Cardinals. I don't think you're going to see a lot of starters up against the Cardinals. I do think that you will probably see some, though. I don't know if this ends up being a Derek Carr game. I imagine Derek Carr will get one series at some point, and the entire first or second team defense at some point will probably get 1 or 2 reps as well, or 1 or 2 series as well, just to make sure that everything's kind of functioning there. But it's not like a situation where you're going to go out and actually run pieces of your new scheme and run pieces of your new system and all that. It's not a situation where you're necessarily looking at these players having to go out there to get like one series of, the wide zone offense in its totality under their belt before they play week 1. That's just not going to be the case, right? You're going to play some vanilla version of the offense at the absolute most. And then in addition to that, at a later time, you're really looking to see where this team is when it comes to their regular season. And that's going to be the thing that really kind of gives you an idea of where this team is. It's not going to be some preseason drive or series at any point. But I do think that there are some starters that you will see a good bit of over the course of the preseason, one of which is offensive tackle Taliese Fuaga. Now, the reason why I mention him, and he's a really interesting case because he's already really integral to your success in 2024. So you don't want to risk him getting hurt. This is what happened to Trevor Penning his rookie season, right? It was a preseason game against the Chargers, if I remember correctly. He ended up getting hurt, and then he ended up missing out on his entire rookie season because of that. So you don't want that replay, right? But he also hasn't played left tackle in a while. He's played nothing but right tackle during his time over at Oregon State. He's been playing left tackle here in practice environments, but this is really your first opportunity to get him live shots on a real life game at that position. So do you take an opportunity or some opportunities over the course of these 3 preseason games to give him those reps? I think you have to. So that will be one that will be interesting to watch because, again, you're going to want to be careful with it. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Taliese Fuaga has to play an entire game or even an entire half or even an entire quarter for that matter, but go out there and get him some reps there early on so that he gets a little bit settled down with the speed and all these other things. The player on the opposite side, Trevor Penning, I think is going to be right there in the same boat. We've seen Trevor Penning deal with preseason injuries before, so you probably don't want a rehash of that, but you got to get him in there playing right tackle because he hasn't played right tackle in a live game situation. So get him out there so that he gets the opportunity to at least do that. I think that's got to be a part of his game plan as well. So I wouldn't be surprised to see both Taliese Fuaga and Trevor Penning getting multiple snaps over the course of either all 3 games or at least 2 of the 3 games this offseason. I wouldn't be surprised to see that at all. So I think those 2 in particular are going to see some snaps against Arizona. I think that they'll probably see some snaps in other preseason games as well. And so I mentioned that I believe that the Saints offense will have more players that will get snaps during the preseason than the Saints defense. I think part of that is that we already see how injured the defense is. You already have Paulson Adebo not on the field, Demario Davis, Pete Werner not on the field. Like, you're already seeing, some of these injuries and things like that kind of take place. So that's inherently going to take some people out of the conversation, particularly up against Arizona. But at the same time, on the defensive side, there's so much of a lack of newness, right? And there is very much a sense of comfort. Oh, and you add in Marshawn Lattimore in that equation too, a sense of comfort with what this team is over on the defensive side, that you don't necessarily have to get a look at your starting defense. You can instead get a look at some of the younger guys, the Shamar Jean Charleses, Kool-Aid McKinstry. Get a look at some of these guys, Anthony Orji, Khaleke Hudson, these guys that are either young or new to the team, get them more of the reps. Over on the offensive side, guys like Taliese Fuaga, Trevor Penning, even a guy like Lucas Patrick would make sense to get some run with the New Orleans Saints offensive line. And he's a potential starter for the team, especially with Nick Saldiveri right now dealing with injury and falling so far behind in that left guard competition. Then you add on top of that a guy like Cedric Wilson, who I think will be the team's wide receiver 3. That's technically a starting role. He gets an opportunity to go out there and be a part of that. Dallin Holker could potentially be seen as a quote unquote starter based upon how much the Saints utilize the tight end position. That's another guy that would get an opportunity out there. And the team's numbers are skinny at tight end. So a guy like Holker should be getting some opportunities to go out there and make plays in the preseason. And I think running back becomes really tricky too, because you're not going to see Alvin Kamara getting any play over the course of the offseason or over the course of the preseason, certainly not this weekend. They could go to Jamal Williams, but they also still have, even without Kendre Miller in the lineup, a pretty good trio of running backs that they could work with as well in Jordan Mims, who's kind of been the big time highlight guy of training camp so far from the position, Jacob Kabodi, the undrafted free agent. And then they also have James Robinson, who's a former 1,000-yard rusher in the NFL back when he was an undrafted free agent rookie with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And so this one could get interesting too, because there is a jostling for position that could potentially take place between Jordan Mims and Kendre Miller. This is expected to be a running back by committee approach. And right now it's hard to envision who the committee is outside of Alvin Kamara. It's more of a Kamara than it is a committee. And I don't know that you're going to be able to answer many questions after just the first preseason game. So you're going to have to wait and see how things kind of roll out all throughout the rest of camp. But it's a position where the team is kind of slim, at least a lot more slim than we're accustomed to seeing them be over the offseason. They're typically always adding veteran running backs and all that. Later on, later on in the day on Monday, they tried out a bunch of linebackers. They still have not tried out any running backs and things like that. So they're clearly very comfortable with the options that they have in the room. But who really gets the opportunity this weekend to separate themselves may come down to the guys that are behind Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams, as opposed to Jamal Williams being a part of that conversation. So I think just inherently you're going to see more offensive starters and you're going to see defensive starters. But the funny thing is that, again, I don't think it's going to benefit the offensive starters in the way that some people might think. I think that there's benefit to taking preseason snaps. Get hit, right? You haven't been able to be hit all offseason. Go out there and get hit. Go out there and hit. I think that there's value in that. Go out there and operate at NFL speed. I think that there's value in that. Go out there and execute in a real game situation with real game pressure. I think that there's value in that. I don't think, however, just to repeat, that the Saints are going to run some big version of their new offense. And in fact, actually, Dennis Allen said something on Monday where he talked about how on the off day, they're going to be doing some scripting, game plans for the Arizona Cardinals, and then, quote, how and if they show any of the new offense. And so I think that that's another piece, is the, quote, how and if, unquote, that he was talking about. How much and what at all, if anything at all, do they show over the course of the preseason? So I don't think having to rush the offensive starters out because you need to get them acclimated to the system is going to be a part of the equation. So that's the way that I look at it for now. All right, y'all, we appreciate you very much, as always, for joining us and making us your first listen of the day every day. For your second listen, don't forget to go and check out our friends over at Locked On Fantasy Football. Your fantasy drafts are here. It's time. Make sure you go and check everything out with Vinny Iyer and Michelle Majuk, her wife, Kate Majuk, does our Locked On Dynasty Football podcast. Michelle Majuk here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We appreciate appreciate you very much as always, making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.